Hey everyone, hope you've all had a good week. One key contemplation which has crossed my mind this week has just been our general identification with identities. Now, what do I mean by identities? Well, they take on many forms. When someone asks you who you are, you might give them your name, you might give them your nationality, you might even give them your job. Now, people will say this is normal because I guess society has always said this is how the world operates. And if you actually watch very closely, people will often ask you what you do before they ask you who you are. And often, depending on your answer, that is how much respect they may assign you. And this whole notion of identity starts becoming problematic when there's attachment and identification with these thought forms, if you will, because what is true does not expire. Now let's run through the list I just went through. Let's take, for example, the job identification. Realistically, your job is going to end. When it comes to 50 or 60, who knows, retirement age is even 70 nowadays. Don't know what's happening in the world, but the reality is you will stop working in your corporate occupation eventually, right? And therefore, you need to ask yourself, could this be a false identity? If it is going to expire, then it probably is. And that's why a lot of people have, your midlife crisis, because realistically, once they've lost that attachment to this false idea of themselves, the whole world caves in. And that realization of it being false starts coming to the forefront. In terms of other identifications, and I guess this is where it can actually start getting a bit problematic, is identities with ailments, with diseases, and with limiting beliefs. And this is where I think the majority of our suffering as humans come in. And I like to share an example of this where I personally experienced the negative effects of possessing an identity in something which encompassed falsehood. And I'll give you the background as to how I was encouraged to actually identify with false ideas. So, in essence, since I was young as a kid, I always saw myself as a warrior, and that's with an O, not an A. A warrior. I was always stuck in my head, and this happened from a very young age. When I was at school, I'd have panic attacks for tests, and it really extended to all areas of my life. When I was, on the sports field, I'd always be worried about injuries. It was just this detrimental thought pattern. And I guess, the more adults I consulted with at that time, teachers, medical professionals, their general answer was, oh, you must just be nervous. You must just be anxious. And I guess the real nail in the coffin is, when eventually, you start going to these medical professionals and they might just say, you have anxiety. And I guess all of these labels, because they came from places of perceived authority, I chose to accept them and believe them. And I literally manifested the fruits of having this limiting belief that I was anxious, and whenever I'd be writing a test, the same outcome would happen. I'd get that anxiety. And, before I knew it, it started almost being a parasite which spread it to other areas of my life. And I just really saw danger and nervousness in every activity. And then one day, as I started doing more and more inner work, and I started doing more and more meditation, journaling, and once you sit within the seat of your soul, you realize a lot of what you told yourself is just an idea. And I challenged myself and I thought, you know what? I'm actually going to consciously choose to let go of this identity of an anxious person. I'm choosing to label this as falsehood. And I'm just going to see what happens. And the effects were actually astonishing, because before I knew it, the same situations which triggered me were no longer triggering me. In my day-to-day interactions, I was a lot more confident, a lot more grounded, a lot more centered. And, a lot of people also noticed these changes and they asked me what I was doing. And the funny thing here is it's more what I wasn't doing. That's what it is. I chose to literally stop entertaining a false identity. That's all I did. So I guess it's more what you don't do in these instances with the detrimental effects of identification as a whole. And when you really look at yourself as a person, I encourage you to really just look at what aspects you're holding on to. It can be physical. Maybe some of us, I myself, I go to the gym. Once upon a time, I was very into gains and being shredded and, the likes, and I was very attached to that. Then I had a health issue. I lost all my gym progress in a week, literally had a major health issue, lost all my gym progress in a week. And then that was another thing which crossed my mind, why should I attach to something physical and transient, which is going to leave me anyway? So now when I'm in the gym, don't get me wrong, still chase the pump a bit, but I'm a lot more rational in how I see myself, and I guess this also extends to diseases. Maybe you are someone who has arthritis, or you have an autoimmune disease, or, it really can be anything. And I've seen it firsthand in the medical system. The doctors don't say you are experiencing joint pain. They say you have arthritis. They don't say if you have an autoimmune disease. They don't say, you are experiencing shoulder pain and hematological abnormalities in your blood work. They say you have polymyalgia. They are getting you to identify with fear. And through identifying with fear, from there, you can get locked in to another false identity. And this becomes problematic because your thoughts can literally alter your reality. So if you're thinking, oh, I have arthritis, I'm so sick, I have all of these things, right? The chances are you're not probably going to get better. And you're going to outsource a large portion of your life to other people who are also stuck in false identities. And, the programming goes on and on. And one of the last key things here, which I think is important to mention as well, is having an identity in trauma can really just derail your lives. I don't know if you guys have one friend or met that person where, don't get me wrong, people have been through things in their life, but the minute you speak to them, they keep recounting the past, they're reliving the past, they're bringing the past into, they're so stuck in the past, they can't really tap into their power of the present. And don't get me wrong, although trauma can really lock us in to some pretty devastating emotional patterns and elicit very, very strong reactions within us, we do owe it to ourselves to slowly work through and process this trauma, as opposed to really recalling it from the past and finding an identity with it. And when these traumatic events happen, it's very easy to really get stuck in that charge it elicits it, because these events are so strong and they caused us a lot of pain. And it's the mind's natural job to recall what's dangerous so you can avoid it again. But when we keep doing this consistently, we keep recalling the trauma, we keep saying, I am Jonathan who was in a car accident 6 years ago. It's really no different to saying, my name is Jonathan, I am a repairman, or I am a pilot. So you can quickly start really creating an overlay of an identity from your trauma. And through you really finding an identity in this trauma and recalling the negative events of your past, there is a chance, in my own opinion, that if you truly believe that to be your identity, there may be some cross diffusion into your present and your future. So when you think about it, if you've been in an accident and you keep telling everyone, I was in an accident, and over time, whether it's conscious or subconscious, you may start actually seeing yourself as an unlucky person, if that makes sense. So it starts becoming quite a tricky game with these traumatic events, because they're multifaceted and they're multi-layered, and we owe it to ourselves to step away from our past, and doing this obviously in a very mindful and present way. You should always process your trauma. I'm not saying, and it is really good to also really voice these traumatic events. It really is. And there is catharsis which occurs when we do this. What I'm saying is not getting stuck in the loop of thinking that we are the product of the difficult events of our past. And, whether you process it through therapy, through meditation, you do owe it to yourself to really work through it, as opposed to bypassing it. And I'm not saying you should just say, act like it never happened. There are healthy ways to deal with this, but just how there are healthy ways to deal with it, there also are unhealthy ways if we recall these events in perpetuity. So I guess that sums up the last point. And so I guess just to essentially summarize what we've discussed today, the first thing is there are societal identities which have been imposed on us, whether this be across occupations, our physical identity, our traumas. The second thing is we really need to recognize which parts of these identities belong to us. And the third thing is, are we as individuals willing to let go of these identities so that we can truly tap in to our true identity, which is our God essence, which resides within us.